Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm joined by Johnny Gorman. Johnny, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So excited to be speaking with you. You're a former professional footballer. You've entered the world of sports psychology. You're about to embark on a PhD, but I'd love to hear more about that. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Johnny, and tell us about your work.
I started off just kicking the ball around in my garden, and that sort of transpired into local team and then onto academies. Worked my way through the academy system. Started off at Man City, moved over the border to Man United for 5 years, and then
Wow, you traitor.
I know. Well, I'm a Man United fan, so it wasn't too hard for me.
Right.
There was a few sort of trials in other clubs and so on, and then eventually ended up at Man United, and then went down to Wolves for my scholarship and my professional career. I always sort of had it in my mind to keep going with my education, so I did some A levels at Repton School when I was doing my scholarship at Wolves, which was really good on both sides, from the club and the school. And then, international debut came. I think I'd had about 30 minutes of reserve team football by this point, so that was all a bit of a story. And then made my Premier League debut for Wolves, played a couple of minutes in the Premier League, and then that was my sole appearance for Wolves. And then, down to Leyton Orient, where I met yourself. And on from there. Went into non-league football, sort of didn't really work out by this point for me. Played in non-league for a couple of years where I really tried to give it a go, and then just sort of had this idea from some of my experiences within football that I'd quite like to perhaps be on the other side of the table, where you're a psychologist or someone that helps people. And I just formatted a sort of a route. I did a few years at the Open University just to see if I was interested, worked as a support worker, and then
Fantastic.
Into the University of Bath, did my undergrad, did my master's, started working in mental health for Bath Mind and on acute wards in the NHS. And then at that point decided that I'd quite like to go down the clinical route. So worked as an assistant for a couple of years, and then after a couple of attempts, I've got on, or second attempt, I got on the clinical doctorate at Lancaster. So, and I've just started there now. So that's my whistle stop tour of my journey to today.
You've been busy.
Yeah.
What a CV though, Johnny. I mean, you've got Manchester City there, Manchester United, Wolverhampton Wanderers. You've got your degree. Was your degree in psychology?
Yeah, it was. A 4-year course where it was like an integrated masters at the University of Bath.
So you came out with a degree in psych and a master's in
psychology as well. Yeah.
In psychology, and you're going down the clinical route. So the PhD is in clinical psychology.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. With an eye to helping sports people in the future, is sport, or is that too narrow a population? You're looking more broadly.
I think my view on it has been I'm conscious of not stereotyping myself, because I think a lot of people say this to me. They say, "Oh, are you going to go down the sport route?" And I say, I was having this conversation just yesterday actually, and I said, "Yes, I think I will," and I have done stuff with some sports people so far that I've really enjoyed. Just helping and sort of having conversations with people, and I do feel it's somewhere that will take me. My interest will take me there, because it's what I know, it's what I grew up in. But I also do like some of the other stuff that I'm learning at the moment. And I said this right at the start of my degree 6 years ago, that I'd just be open minded, and wherever it takes me, with an eye on just helping people and trying to make people's lives a little bit better, really. And if that's in sport, that would be great. And I know there's some clinical psychologists in sport that I've had some contact with through various methods. And so I think there is definitely an angle there for me.
Well, we definitely need more good clinical psychs who are specialising in sport for sure.
Mhm.
We're here today actually to talk about a paper that you've co-written called Inside the Football Factory, Young Players' Reflections on Being Released. An
Mhm.
enormously important topic dealing with being released. We're going to be talking about that for this episode. I am keen to talk a little bit more about your experiences as a professional player. I mean, just reflecting on your experiences at some of these top clubs, what was your exposure to sports psychology in some of these clubs?
Fairly limited, to be honest, in sort of the academy days. I'm
Mm,
going back to say 9, 10, 11 years old. There wasn't a lot.
yeah, there wasn't, was there,
Well,
a decade ago?
well, what am I now? I'm 32 now, so that would have been
Okay.
20 years ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
there you go.
yeah.
You look younger than you are, Johnny.
Thank you. But yeah, so when I was sort of growing up through the early days, and I don't think it was consciously in anyone's awareness then.
Mm,
Not until I got to Wolves really did I there wasn't contact with the club. Wolves had quite a bit going on, but my mum actually arranged for me to go and see Tom Fawcett at University of Salford, and it's just because I was struggling sort of in my under 15s year at Man United. Things weren't going too well for me. There was a lot of pressure around um, getting a scholarship or getting released, and that was sort of always threatened. There was quite a lot of threat that went on in academy life, that's not just at Man United. I've spoke to many people about that, and they all felt very similar high levels of threat of being released at all times. And Tom just did a really good exercise with me where he got me to think about all the other things going on in my life that I could focus on and perhaps maybe start looking at those as well as football. And it was like a little switch in my mind that just reframed me away from being so hyper focused on football to actually seeing friends, enjoying myself going out, doing other sports, cricket, whatever it was on offer at school. Just being a little bit more of a rounded person rather than just having football on my mind 24/7, and that seemed to really help. And I came back that the under 16s year and had a really good season, and ended up being offered a scholar by Man United. I feel probably off the back of that, and but then made my way down to Wolves. So Wolves had a number of people. They had psychologists that would come in, but I didn't really fare too well with sort of there's that conscious thing of do they work for the club or do they work for you? And I'm sure
yeah.
you've had many conversations
Oh
with
yes.
football around
Yeah.
with footballers around this. It's a really tricky subject or topic, and I think we all have a level of guardedness around that. And especially, this is going back to say 2009. I joined Wolves. I don't think sports psychology. I think there was still that vulnerable, stigmatized view
Yeah.
of mental health in sport, and it's got a lot better. But it definitely was still there. You'd have people would all be sort of competing with each other, and you'd be wary that if you sort of
Mm,
showed a chink in your armour, that might be used against you. Mick McCarthy actually hired Mike Wood and Jeff Whitley. Jeff Whitley used to play for Man City, amongst some other clubs, and had his own sort of addiction issues. Mike Wood, he was like an addiction specialist, and he
okay.
did some counselling. But knew Mick, and he brought them in to help someone with some gambling issues at one point, or was it alcohol issues? One of the two. Before I was at the club, and then as I came down, they were there, and I got on really well with those two. And I think that's when the cogs of I could really be interested in some of this stuff in a future career started turning. So I always think Wolves were. I think I've said it before. They were almost like a bit of a step ahead of some other clubs at the time because they also had other counsellors, other psychologists that came in and did work with us as well, which was beneficial. But I got the most out of Jeff and Mike really.
Did you feel that the work you did, I mean, just reflecting back on the work you did when you were around 15 years old and broadening out your identity, your athletic identity. And I know we're going to talk more about this because your research project, the main psychological theory running through that research project, is to do with social identity. But did you feel broadening out your identity really helped you to manage the day-to-day challenges thrown at you when you were at Manchester United, then when you were at Wolves, and then subsequently Leyton Orient? Tell us a little bit more about that.
I think it was a priming factor for me. I think it primed me to maybe go down the education route as well as playing professional football. I did some A levels alongside my scholarship, which I have sort of strong views on this. That scholars, they're there to play football, but a lot get released, and the education that they receive is possibly not going to set them up for later life. So I have two university lecturer parents who are very interested in education, and they sort of wanted me to carry that forward. And I felt I had enough time to do that. And it worked quite well with the school and with Wolves to do that. But I think that possibly, and I've reflected on this recently, I don't think I'd made that link consciously before until maybe a couple of months back, where I think that session with Tom really just set me up to not have football as the be all and end all in my life. And I think, that sort of set me up for the education stuff. But there was times at Wolves, maybe in my professional, when I turned professional and was there full time, when I just slowly got more and more sucked into being a professional footballer, living that lifestyle, sort of changing my identity to revolve more around what my peers were interested into, maybe rather than what I'm interested in. I think it's if you stay somewhere long enough and everyone's doing the same thing, you'll get sucked into it too. So I feel that still happened, even sort of into when I was at Leyton Orient and into a couple of years at non-league where I was really trying to give it a go. So
that's really interesting. It sounds to me like it was a constant battle to be able to retain that sense of multiple identities. You, the footballer, you, the student, amongst other things, amongst other identities. It was a constant battle for you. I mean, that sounds quite challenging, quite exhausting.
Oh, it was definitely a struggle. I think there was I remember that specifically at the time being the thing I really struggled with was had Johnny the footballer that everyone knows in this sort of glamorous footballing kind of way, but actually behind closed doors, football's a very tough industry, and there's a lot that goes on that people don't see that sort of alluded to in the paper. But then also, football's only part of you, and there's this whole other person within you. And I was fortunate that maybe just through possibly my parents, conversations with people like Tom Fawcett, maybe having wider interests and maybe thinking, oh, I'd like to do this and I'd like to do that in the future. I already had that sort of mindset that football wasn't going to last forever. But the football system makes you feel like you just have to be focused on football, otherwise you're not going to make it. So you've got this real disparity between the two selves that you've got. You've got this person that needs to show up and be Johnny the footballer, and then this whole other human being within you that isn't allowed to develop openly.
Just dwelling on that idea of being a young, ambitious footballer, a young, ambitious sports competitor.
Mm-hmm.
This notion of just focus on football or just focus on your sport. From your experiences, you were at City for a little bit, then Manchester United, Wolves. You've played alongside, played with, trained every day with some damn good players, probably players who went on to have a stellar career, perhaps, maybe. How much credibility do you think there is in the notion of, hey, come on, just focus on your football, just focus on your sport? Because ultimately, if you don't, or at least this is the dots I'm connecting here, is this notion of just focus on your football, focus on your sport. If you don't, you won't make it. How much credibility is there, Johnny, with that? Do you think, in your subjective opinion?
I think it's hard because it's not just you that's having this battle around you. It's because
Mm.
everyone else around you is wary of your social identity of the footballer, and that's where all the energy and the attention goes. And I had some family members even say, "Why don't you just focus on football?" Whenever I was talking about maybe being interested in something else. Yeah,
I suppose what I'm asking you is, you are fighting to multiply your identity, and I understand why. And this is something we talk a lot about in sports psychology. And this is the great work that Tom Fawcett did with you, is introducing this to you. And I think you're delighted that he did, and it's subsequently influenced you. I suppose I'm asking you, do you think it ultimately, when you reflect back, did it detract? Did
yeah.
having multiple identities detract from your ability or your capacity to develop in your football?
Um, yes, is the very simple answer to that. I
Okay.
think, and I've reflected on this a number of times, if I'd have just had the attitude of, right, football is the be all and end all, and that's it, and just knuckle down and focus and do everything you need to do. And there were times where I really did try and do that for a number of years, sort of maybe around 19, 20, 21. I really tried to make it the focus of my life. And the pressure of it doesn't, I think there's a balance and there's a scale that you can tip over.
Hmm.
And multiple times I tipped over that scale. And what I found is then my motivations just completely left me.
Okay.
I remember at the end of the season at Leyton Orient, there was about a month to go. We were still in the playoffs. I wasn't even getting on the bench by this point. We'd signed quite a lot of players just to bolster up the squad. And me being a younger player and maybe not as good as some of the others, I was put back to sitting in the stands and watching the games. And I think when that becomes your sole thing that you're focusing on, and my sole thing at that time was to get on the bench, get some minutes, get playing for Leyton Orient, and try and carve out a career for myself. Actually, when that wasn't happening for me, then the motivation completely disappeared to the point where I think I just thought, I don't even want to, like, I just need a summer and I need to reset and go again. But I really remember that last month at Leyton Orient just being totally demotivated by it all because I'd given it so much energy. Whereas possibly if I'd have had other things going on that I was interested in and maybe other things that I could fall back onto, I could perhaps compartmentalise my football career, personal life, other things going on. But my football career was pervasive in all of my interests, identities, everything going on at the time. So it just led to demotivation. It would, if things had gone really well and I would have gone on and maybe got some minutes, started playing, broke into the Leyton Orient first team, it would have been perfect. It would have. I would have been. We'd probably be looking back here now, having a conversation about having a football career in the football league, and how my identity for that year of my life where I really just focused on football, that really suited me. So I'm not going to rule out that would, with hindsight, maybe I'd look back on it that way. But yeah, it's all dependent on the context of things, I guess, and what happens, and if you keep going.
As a neat segue then to talking about your paper here,
Mhm.
again, repeating the title, Inside the Football Factory, Young Players' Reflections on Being Released. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of this paper. Obviously, identity being something that you're
Mhm.
really interested in and experienced as a player
Mhm.
yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about the beginnings of this research.
So yeah, it came about. I was in my undergraduate year at Bath, and I didn't have a clue what I was going to do.
Right.
as I'm sure many former students and undergraduate students can relate to. And I was so wary of not going down the football route because I felt I'd moved away from that now. And I was trying to sort of carve out a different self. And I really wanted to do some clinical psychology related stuff, perhaps in line with some of the work I was doing. But um, it, a number of things happened. I had like different tutors, like a tutor went off on maternity leave and other things that happened. And then I got talking to someone about some of his data around football and so on. And then in the end, I ended up just doing a really basic study, what I thought was just on mental health in football. And I compared former players and current players with a few psychometric scales. One of them being athletic identity, others around self-esteem and mental health and so on. And I just did a really sort of simple study, and I put in a little comment box for everyone to comment. And I had about 150 participants across the two, but the current and the former players. And I got some really interesting comments from that box. I didn't actually use that in my undergraduate thesis, but it made me realise that perhaps everyone's looking at former footballers with mental health issues. That seemed like that was my original thought. Oh, it must be to do with mental health and so on. And I think it just, that little bit of research I did uncovered that maybe it's about the loss of identity, and there was a real drop off in athletic identity in my study, which was one of the main findings. But to be expected as well. If you're not in sport anymore, you're naturally going to have that drop off. And I think that's where I became really interested in what's the processes that underpin this. And some of the comments were really rich about how they've really struggled to transition, how they've really struggled to move on from football. Football's still a big part of their life because it's everywhere. And then people talking about subtle things around identity loss. And there was one guy who I went on to interview in the paper we're talking about today, and he was quite big on saying how he felt like he had PTSD from sport, and he came on and he's commented quite a lot throughout the current paper. So I found it really interesting to then build on that, and that's sort of where we ended up with the current research, was looking at more of a qualitative design, because I felt that the data was so rich within that little comment box that I'd go on and do some qualitative work. And that's where I came into contact with Dr. Leda Blackwood at the University of Bath, and she had a lot of understanding around identity. So I approached her and asked her, look, I think something's going on with identity loss here. Would you like to do a paper with me on it? And that's where it came from. So I'm really fortunate that I had Leda to guide me through some of this stuff, because a lot of her research is on this sort of transitions and identity and so on. She had a lot of understanding and background knowledge that I didn't have yet. And that over the last couple of years, we've worked on the paper for publication.
So this paper was co-authored, as you say, by your supervisor on this, Dr. Leda Blackwood, and we've mentioned this term athletic identity quite a lot. Links into social identity. We've spoken about social identity a few times, not least with Dr. Matt Slade, and also with Jeremy Holt and Dr. Will Thomas. Some fantastic episodes on social identity. For those listening in, I know we'd be grateful if you could refresh our memory as to, when we use these terms, social identity and athletic identity. What do we mean by social identity? What do we mean by athletic identity? And in what way might they be compromised by, before we go on and unpack any kind of results here, in what way might they be compromised or compromising to being released?
Yeah, I think in this context, social identity, we all have numerous social identities, whether you're a father, a son, a daughter, a colleague. There's numerous labels we can give ourselves on a day-to-day basis that all make up our different social identities. And I think with athletic identity, that is just another one of those identities. So you may be a runner, you may be someone who goes to the gym, you may be someone who
It's a footballer.
footballer. Yeah. You've got all sorts, anything. So all those labels that we give ourselves, athletic or sports, is sort of pervasive in our society, and many people have different things that they have. But where the footballer identity comes in is for me in this context, football is the most watched sport in the whole world. It's the biggest sport in the UK. It's pervasive in everything. Like, you can't go a day without hearing a new scandal, hearing something new happens. It's everywhere. Like, maybe that's just my algorithms that I'm tuned into on social media as well, but it's all over my social media. I can't escape it, really. So, and for lots of people, it's their entertainment. It's what they put their energy into. It gives them relief from the day to day struggles of life. So you've got this thing that then with the footballer identity, where everyone has such a hyper focus on anyone who is involved in football. And that is the same with golf. Anyone who's involved in golf, people are interested in. Same with rugby, anything like where there's attention, people are interested in it. So, and I think that builds a dynamic out for a human being who perhaps has other identities, such as they may be the son, they may be a student, they may like music, they may have lots of other things they're interested in. But if they get into professional sport or professional football, lots of people around them, sort of society, and crucially, the person themselves, start to really focus on this identity of being the footballer, because it gives them a lot of attention, it gives them a lot of praise, adulation, and sort of the child teaching, learning I've done over the years, sort of in clinical psychology, has taught me that sort of where children are looking for attention, and if you keep getting something, it gets reinforced. They're going to keep going back, even if it's not necessarily healthy for them. And I feel that's possibly what's happening when a young man enters the football system in an academy. Everything starts just turning and churning into being the footballer and being known as the footballer. And that was really common across all of my interviewees. They were all they referred to themselves as, I'm Ryan the footballer, I think I used in the paper, but all of them referred to themselves as the footballer in their younger days. And we had comments around how they felt like celebrities in their area. They felt like everyone knew who they were. Everyone was giving them attention. It was good for their ego. So why wouldn't you, as a young man, ever go and do anything else when you're getting all this gratification and attention and praise off the whole world, whenever you can just get it from being a footballer? So you'll naturally focus on it a little bit more, and that will naturally be your dominant social identity.
So what I'm hearing you say here is that as human beings, we have our own personal identity, but we also have these group memberships that orient us towards our social identity.
Yes.
As you've mentioned, I'm the son, I'm the daughter, I'm the friend, I'm the student, I'm the colleague, I'm Dan who loves golf, I'm Johnny who loves football, and so on and so forth. Now, when something becomes really important to us, when you entered the footballing world, the academy world, and you started to create a story around, well, I like this and I'm good at this and I want to be the best that I can be. And also you're receiving adulation and praise. Our identity then becomes quite hyper focused on this specific area. And that identity becomes, for example, I'm Johnny the footballer. And young people, on both the men's, the women's, the girls, the boys' side of the game, of all sports, it can start to experience identity foreclosure. Is that the term for this, identity foreclosure, to foreclose one's identity?
Yeah, that's the phrase that's come out of lots of research I did, and that was sort of the build on of lots of other really good research in this area from people like Brown and Petrak, where I used their paper from 2009. I noticed that identity foreclosure was there was some research that came out from Brewer and Petit Pass in 2017 that really hyper focused on identity foreclosure, and I just saw that link between the two, and I thought that was a really that was the way to explain what was going on here. And I felt from my own experiences and from just years of conversations with people around football and other sports that was perhaps something that they were experiencing too. Was this idea that we'd narrow down our identities or foreclose our identities around one strong, powerful social identity, because you're getting everything you need from that one social identity, and everyone's giving you the attention and energy and adulation for that identity. And it's pervasive, because even if you are the son as your social identity, your parent may change their view of you because you're the footballer. And then that becomes really tricky to manage. And I've heard that loads of times where families have just completely changed because of the son's gone on to become a professional footballer. Same with it's just pervasive in lots of subtle ways where everything gets twisted into being around the footballer, whatever your social identities are. So they all sort of overlap, and with the primary one being I'm Ryan the footballer, or Aaron the footballer, whoever.
And that's a problem because it can lead to quite a few stressors in life. Let's unpack that. Tell me a little bit about your research here. So you wanted to study those who had been released and understand what?
I realised quite quickly, like I think in the literature reviews where I found things around identity foreclosure and social identity, I realised that perhaps this wasn't a mental health issue. Perhaps what was underpinning some of the mental health issues, as well as, say, drug use, alcohol dependency, or just alcohol use in general, all the adverse things that maybe come from losing your football career or being released. I think I realised that there may be something around identity loss. And because there's only one main identity that a footballer has, once that's taken away from them, sort of, I can't think of the phrase now. It's like the rug.
The rug's pulled from underneath you.
The rug's pulled from underneath you, yes. So there's nothing else to fall back on. So that was what I really wanted to look at, was why does this happen? What's the process behind this, which I thought possibly is identity foreclosure, having a singular dominant social identity in being a footballer. And then what happens after this, and what are the sort of intricacies in the couple of years after, as well as the long-term impacts, which that was a area that perhaps hadn't been looked into in my literature review as well. Like lots of the stuff was looking at maybe the couple of years after, and they were researching guys that were maybe 1 or 2 years out of football or a couple of years out of football. I really wanted to get some understanding of this long term. And I had guys that I had a range of people. I think one had been out 14 years from the game. So he had some really strong views of football, and he'd really moved on in his life. And I had some guys that had 3 or 4 years out of the game and were still involved in non-league football, but were very much, I'm not going to be a footballer now. I'm doing university, or I'm in a job now. So, but they were able to really give some powerful sort of reflections on what's happened for them over the last 3 or 4 years whilst they've been out of the game. So I think I targeted people who I knew didn't want to ever get back into sport. I think they were moving on with their lives, and it was how they looked back on things. The paper was initially called Beyond the Football Factory, where in its early days, because it was very much like, this is what happens beyond, and then we changed it to Inside because it felt more, we were giving a real insider look into it. So
fascinating stuff. And so I'm keen, therefore, I mean, obviously I want to unpack your results, your findings, but so you've given us a clue as to who you interviewed. So this was an interview process, I'm guessing. And who was it specifically that you interviewed? What was the population? How many? And what kind of questions were you asking? What was the interview?
Yeah, so I had 8 guys who eventually all agreed to being interviewed. I've made that sound like they were against their will there, but
Eventually agreed.
it was actually the opposite because this was the first time people had actually been able to speak about their experiences openly and without any judgment or without any fear, or just hadn't had any channels to do so. For one reason or another. And a lot of the guys after the interviews were like, wow, I think one of the comments was that was really like cathartic. Other people were just like, I actually really enjoyed speaking about that. So, and I really enjoyed the interviews as well because I was learning so much about myself as well as them and what I could add to the research. And there was loads of surprises along the way. But I started off, targeted sounds terrible, but that's what I did. I targeted people that I knew could talk openly and speak, and these were maybe former teammates of mine, people that I knew who had some experiences that they could share, and I knew they were willing to. That's obviously crucial in any academic research. Like it's obviously has to go through ethical processes as well, but. And then I asked some of the interviewees after I'd finished the interview, would you know anyone else who would like to be interviewed? And I gained a few people from that. I had a few people drop out for one reason or another, just for timings and stuff. And I think that happens a lot in academic research where so I think I targeted 10 guys with the hope to get 8, and that's what I got in the end. And just interviews, questions were around mainly things around identity. I tried to stay away from talking about turning it into something to do with mental health because that wasn't the aim of the study. And I felt like if people wanted to then disclose some of their mental health issues, that was for them to come up with themselves rather than me directly ask, have you had any mental health issues? Because I was wary that it was around their identity loss and the impact of that. And some people did, due to that underpinning of identity loss, people then disclosed that that's perhaps where some of their issues came from around mental health. But there was lots of other things like the coping mechanisms that they used. And I think the really striking one that I found was people were just the common theme for all 8 participants, even if they were happy to be released and felt a lot of relief, even if they were devastated to be released, all 8 felt for about 2 or 3 years that they just didn't know what they were doing. Like scratching their head. I won't repeat the comment because there's a swear word in it, but they were just scratching their head, walking around thinking, what am I supposed to do with myself now? And had no idea. And I look back on my own journey and I hadn't reflected on that had actually happened to me as well. I'd just minimised it as if it was, I'll just come out and do other things and so on. But between sort of 21, 22, 23, 24, maybe up till I was about 23, I was playing non-league, but I didn't have a clue what I was doing in life. And I went down lots of different routes and tried different things, but ultimately was just devastated from all this stuff that had happened and wasn't talking about it really. And I think that was, for me, quite a big learning point.
Well, I'm keen to unpack your findings.
Yeah.
And there's themes running through your findings. Theme 1, my identity was just football, that football was, and obviously we've spoken about this already, but this was very much the feedback from those that you had interviewed, that when they were released and their identity was really just football. They had identity foreclosure, essentially. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Yeah, well, that theme really is around identity foreclosure, and perhaps some of the methods that participants used on themselves, as well as family members, and the clubs themselves, really, and wider society. So, I think it starts off sort of one of the there's 2 sub themes in this. it starts off with a main source of identity, and that was where I really asked the guys to channel into their childhood and um, where they feel like they've sort of started to gain this footballer identity and sort of um, feeling of being a footballer. And a lot of them reflected on it, how it was when they joined an academy. So they all played locally and school friends and did all of that kind of stuff. But when they joined academies, they all felt that sense of they'd sort of moved up the hierarchy of the social world because they'd become an academy footballer, and they're obviously a sought after um, person, and a lot of value is placed on that, which not a lot of young people get at that age. So yeah, there was lots of comments like I was Ryan the footballer. Um, Everything around Ryan's life was just to focus on football because he didn't want anything to get in the way. He alludes to talking about he didn't even want to chat to girls, which as a teenager is quite a healthy, normal thing to be doing, to be learning about yourself. And I think there was other things like parties that he'd just miss out on. Um, and yeah, similar to myself, I definitely took a backward step with some social things because I had games the next day, and that's what a lot of the participants spoke about, how football became the priority to the exclusion of all else. And the guys, yeah, that's a really sort of thing throughout it. I think the next sub theme within that theme is talking about alternative identities that are unexplored and devalued, and there was a real sense that the guys didn't explore much else because football it took over. It was all they had to focus on. They had school and things like that, but it was always training 3 times a week in the evenings, games on the weekends, practice on your own on the other times that you've got available, and everything else takes a bit of a backward step. You don't really have time to do anything else. And I think in this sub theme, yeah, there was some different things around how like family members said, look, like one of the lads said, I want to play the guitar or just as something else to do, and his dad directly said, Aaron, if you want to take football seriously, you can't be learning the guitar. And I didn't put too much more in the analysis around that, but I remember that was we had about 10 minutes on this subject with Aaron, the participant, around that, where he was really gutted years on that he'd never done that because he felt music's such an important part of his life now, and he felt it was too late to go down that route, but he's lost out on that chance because someone with a bit of power in his father was stood over him saying, look, concentrate on football, mate, rather than even just showing as a hobby to play the guitar, not even as something he wanted to do or pursue. He just wanted to do it as maybe something different.
And if I can interject now,
Yeah,
obviously these aren't their real names, and we can talk openly
yeah,
about this. I wouldn't necessarily blame his father for saying such a thing. Sport, elite sport, professional sport, is encumbered by certain socio-cultural viewpoints or norms.
mm-hmm,
And this idea of single-mindedness
mm-hmm,
comes in. Well, you've got to be single-minded. If you want to play football, then if you want to play in the Premier League, then it's the only thing you should be focused on or interested in. So, again, without knowing the people who are involved, I would automatically go towards blaming the father for saying such a thing. We are a product of often what we hear, over the years in terms of, well, what is the norm here? What should I be advising my son or my daughter when it comes to this? So it's quite a complex landscape in that respect.
yeah. And I think it's important to highlight here as well that when we really unpack that comment around the guitar and where the source of that viewpoint came from, Aaron said he felt it was the club that had drip fed this information to his dad over a number of years to be focused on football above everything else and exclude other things. He definitely felt it because his dad softened up a couple of years later. But he was at this time he was 14. He was doing quite well, and he was the dad was having regular meetings with the football club, and there was that sense of just the club were just drip feeding. You just need to be concentrating on football. He's doing well, da 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 da, and that can sort of just. I call it sometimes like I think football clubs can become like the third parent in the room, and they can influence parenting styles and what parents maybe think is best for their child. And I completely understand why, because there's a power dynamic there. You in this case, this is a huge conglomerate football club with football coaches that are well known. Just telling someone if he does this, he's got a better chance of making it. If you hear that enough times as a parent, you're going to start thinking, "Oh, they're onto something here, and I need to protect my son by making sure he goes and concentrates on football rather than I'm going to protect my son by letting him just be free and learn about himself and explore the world, and whatever he ends up doing, great."
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to add that, sitting here talking with you in 2024, there's some wonderful people involved in brilliant academies in football clubs the world over who take a much more broad lens and sophisticated approach these days. And we're continuing to learn and improve these processes and practices top down within clubs, making sure talent development pathways are as healthy as possible. And there's a lot of safety and health out there at the moment. Interestingly, there's a quote just below that quote about environment, and again coming back to the notion that the environment you find yourself in is going to heavily influence your identity. There's a quote from a young player or a player recalling being 17 years old and getting into the first team, and because you're in that first team, you're essentially whether you're an adult, you're a young adult in an adult environment. And I think it's Ryan who said this. Well, I didn't want to look weak, and so I had to put on this character.
Yeah, this was really interesting. Taking a step back from the research is with Leader having to point out to me that he's 17. He's a minor under the age of 18. He's a
Yeah.
child still. Because in the football world, 16 is your cut-off point into sort of adulthood in my head, because that's the system I grew up in. And yeah, I was around first teams at 16, 17, where all this stuff was going on, and it was the norm. And it was perhaps Leader's influence here in the paper where she highlighted things out to me that I'd perhaps minimised, because, yeah, not to look weak, not to look vulnerable. You almost become like a stage character. And I feel a number of the participants sort of highlighted that feeling of, I need to put on this show, and I need to put on this personality to not look weak, to protect myself within this tough system I'm going through. And I think we called it the hardening process, and I think that a couple of players, participants, referred to it as like it was a real hardening process, and something that they felt they had to go through as part of their development almost. And I explained this to Leader, and she was just like, "Well, just think about what you're saying here. Like, it's why does it have to be like that?" So. And I get coaching styles and managerial styles are probably changing over the last number of seasons. And this is a guy, I think he would have come through the system maybe about 8 years ago. I think coaching styles are slowly changing to be a bit more or a bit less authoritarian, and a little bit more sort of person centered, and understanding of there's a human being behind this 17-year-old lad, and that we perhaps need to nurture a little bit more. So.
I think it's a tough one, isn't it? Because as you write in the paper here, Ryan's account of transitioning to a men's environment provides three important insights. That you might have to endure some abuse, like Ryan did from the assistant manager. He accepts the abuse because his perception is he can't afford to look weak in front of coaches and teammates. And then you've written about this demands an inauthentic performance. He must put on a character who might not be yourself. And I think there it makes me think of the difference between putting on a character because you're trying to deal with abuse versus, being able to flex your behaviors, your persona, your actions, maybe even your thoughts, emotions, feelings, in order to build resilience. For me, the latter is healthy. The former is unhealthy. The challenge is for clubs, and I don't want to get too much off the topic here, but for clubs is when you've got a squad of 25 players with different personas, many of whom are quite hardened in front of this young player, coaches themselves, no matter how open the coaches are to tailor their communication to this young person, you're always probably going to have senior players who are going to be less open to tailoring their communication. So that environment, whether it's men's team or women's team, young people entering an adult world, I wonder if it's more about setting up that young person with the skills and the tools to be able to flex in those environments, to be able to receive communication that they don't particularly love, but to be able to flex in order to deal with that environment, rather than worrying too much about, well, our first team players have to be able to communicate with this young person effectively. I just wonder how unachievable that is.
Yeah, I agree, and that was something throughout the paper that there was things that I knew we were discussing that perhaps are not going to change overnight. And I think you made a really valid point that some of this stuff is resilience provoking, and that is beneficial for you, because to go out and play in front of 60,000 people in the Premier League, you're going to need a level of resilience that is going to be built up through your training methods, and that's where a lot of this stems back to. It's the preparation for professional football. And I think one of the things I've learned coming out of professional football is just not to take things so personally, and learn those skills of, this is the environment. This isn't personal to me. I didn't have those skills as a 17-year-old. I don't think some of the participants did either. I really got that sense of vulnerability from them that perhaps not many 17-year-olds are put in that environment where they have to learn that things aren't personal to them. You perhaps don't get that till maybe your mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s, when you've been around enough working environments to know that this happens in life.
And I think the onus is on all of us in the industry to provide as many resources as possible for young people and older people alike, and for all of us, but as many resources as possible in order to be able to, because as you say, I mean, you can't, I personally don't think you can expect a 17-year-old without formal training to be able to enter an adult world, and I'm talking about both men's and women's football here, or any sport, enter an adult world, and to be able to deal with adults effectively in those very acute environments where feedback, and some vicious feedback, is being given to you left, right, and centre, in a highly pressurized environment. I don't think you can expect them to deal with that just because they've got a lot of skill in their feet or in their hands.
Yeah.
Some have got so much skill that they get away with it, perhaps, but the vast majority don't. And so there's enormous assumptions that these young people can deal with it. And to speak to what you're saying here, your own experience, my experience, and the experience of those that you interviewed, well, you're just not ready at 17 years old. Your feet are ready, your hands are ready, but your brain isn't.
Yeah. I agree completely. I think it's that transition into first team football is such a huge step, compared to any other stage in the football ladder. It's all very neatly staged, where you go from year group to year group to year group, then to reserves. That jump up to becoming a first team squad player, and then into the first team, is massive. And dealing with adults, dealing with that conversation style, dealing with conflict with people that are much bigger than you and perhaps famous celebrities with huge social identities as footballers. It's very hard to challenge that, and the successful players seem to be the ones that are good at. Obviously, you get your Wayne Rooney's and your players like that will go on and have careers anyway, but no matter what they do, because they're just so good. But there's a lot of players that they they maneuver the people skills quite well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Theme 2 is exiting the bubble, and
Yeah.
theme 3 is football is with you forever. Give us some idea of what was unpacked in these two themes.
Yeah. So it starts off with the sort of what I perceive to be what I was expecting to find, which was devastation, just complete horror at being released. I think there's some really powerful quotes around, like, it's the ultimate setback. It all comes crashing down around you.
Life is at an end.
Yeah, this is heartbreaking, and it's sort of then summarised by Ryan. Refer back to Ryan saying, "I'm no longer Ryan the footballer," and how he alludes to going from being an athlete to being not quite a nobody, but just being an average Joe was the comment he used a number of times, and how he sort of rejoined groups of people that he perhaps looked down on and felt superior to, and and how you transition back into the real world, you exit the bubble. Well, what was fascinating was that there was also this other side to it, where about three or four of the guys were talking about how relieved they were from it, and they were pleased and quite happy to move on and move out of football and do other things, because perhaps it wasn't this glamorous career that they thought it was going to be, and they weren't earning fortunes and fortunes. They were on scholarship wages or very low first year professional football wages, which at some clubs are not very much. So they were quite happy to move on and go. Some even one guy even celebrated it. He went out and went out with his mates. I think that was because of his deeper disillusionment with the sport. But yeah, there was that sense of, I've had enough of this. The shackles are off. I can go off and do other things now. But yeah, then it moves on to the period of bewilderment that, as I've said before, it didn't really matter if you were relieved or devastated. It didn't matter where you were on that continuum. There was a real sense of, once that identity is taken away, and you've got nothing else to fall back on, and you've got no complexity, you've got nothing that you can go on to do quickly or move into. You just sort of, the rug's pulled, taken away from you, and you just sat there scratching your head thinking, what am I supposed to do now?
Just pausing on that. Sorry to interject, but that's really interesting, because it makes me think of, thinking, emoting, and feeling at surface levels than at deeper levels. In terms of, the immediate response can be actually relief, because you look at your life and you look at what you experience and you go, oh wow, I don't have the pressure of turning up every day and having to perform with my football. I'm on really low wages here in a scholarship program or first or second year pro. So there's this instant relief. But then it's this kind of the deeper thoughts, emotions, feelings around your identity that then start to surface over time. That notion of that dissonance around, well, I don't know, Aaron the footballer, but now I'm not. And because you've lacked those multiple identities, and because you haven't explored that so much, and because perhaps you haven't explored other interests and other worldviews, then of course that starts to sink in, and then that can lead to the kind of anxiety, depression, and psychological experiences that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think you summarised it perfectly. Yeah, that was that's essentially what was discussed. I think there's this feeling of being on. I think for the guys who felt relieved, they were on the periphery of their team anyway. So, and they have this sort of, there was a thing of juggling this identity from the outward world of you're a footballer, but actually when you're in the football world, you were on the periphery and you weren't actually doing that well, and you got released. And then you come out of that and you're just juggling all these different things. And I don't think the football world is set up to, and maybe it's changed a little bit now over the last few years with the introduction of some things around aftercare and so on. But
Yeah, there's some good. Crystal Palace, for
yes,
example, I know do a lot of good aftercare,
yeah,
and there's other clubs
yeah,
as well.
and
So please excuse me
I
for not
think
mentioning those.
that's starting. But for all the guys who I interviewed, some left maybe as late as 2018. Some left 2010. So that it was over that decade. All of them didn't feel like they had any aftercare or anyone that reached out and said anything to them or just checked in, and even like a phone call. Some said they didn't even want that they'd moved on. They didn't want to have that trauma experience and feeling be brought back up, and they were quite happy to be left alone. But
Yeah,
as we know, if people sit there and don't talk about some of their emotions, things can ruminate, it can get worse. And there was that sense of, it really took people 2 to 3 years of like trying to work out all these difficult emotions whilst people are around them who don't understand how to navigate that either. And not many of them reached out for therapy. Not many of them reached out to do anything. They sort of avoided it all and went alone. And that was quite consistent as well. That they just tried to do it by themselves, and in that sort of hyper masculine, I'll be okay. Leave me alone, and it'll be fine. And that was quite a sad thing to observe in the data.
is that very much encased in that theme 3 of football is with you forever?
Yeah. So yeah, theme 3. Yeah, there was this feeling of being stifled by people giving you the tag of the football. I still get it now occasionally. Like they go, "Oh, you still playing football, mate? How's football?" And I'm like, I laugh, and I think it's funny now. But for a number of years in my early days, I was perhaps emotionally emotionally not as I think my reaction to things may be a bit emotional, and I'd just say, "Oh, like." I think I used to say, "Are you going to just ask me something else about my life other than football?" Because I think I just got to this point of everyone around me just it was their focus and not mine, and that was really evident in the data with some of the guys, of that feeling of being stifled, and you can't move on because people keep bringing it up all the time, especially the younger guys who are still perhaps playing non-league. And I think that's a really good avenue for guys to go and play non-league, because it gives you all the team stuff, and you still playing and the fitness as well. And I think it's good in that aspect, but it doesn't give you a clear break, unlike some other sports like tennis. I don't. Maybe I shouldn't speak specifically about any sports, but maybe some of the people I spoke to in sports such as tennis, they've said, well, once you come out of the professional realm, there's not much else out there for. There's not a big non-league setup for you to go and play.
No, 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 no.
Whereas football has that safety net, but it also doesn't allow you to just have that clean break and move on and do something else. So yeah, and that can be a hindrance at times. What was nice though is as the guys got a little bit older, there was this feeling of acceptance around. I'm never going to get away from football. I feel like that now. I think perhaps alluding to my struggles with picking this as a topic to research in, I was really scared about being stereotyped further. And now I'm just like, you know what, this is part of me. I can't get away from it. And I'm much more, I'm free with talking to people about football. And there was same with the other guys. They spoke a lot about just, you know what, if it was once me, but I've got all these other things I do now. A lot would list their occupations, other things they do, or the sports they play again now, things they've done that are different. Like some went travelling, all sorts of different things like that, and how they've moved on, but they'll fortunately or unfortunately, they'll never get away from it. It depends on the person.
It's really interesting, Johnny, because it reminds me we've had Professor Dan McAdams from Northwestern University on the show before, and
Yeah.
he would be arguably one of the world's leading personality scientists, and he does a lot of great work on personality development over
Mm.
the lifespan. And what you're saying there reminds me of, he talks about personality development being really on three levels.
Mm.
You've got your characteristic traits at the very deepest, and then you've got your characteristic adaptations, kind of your interpretations, your strategies, your goals, your self-efficacy, and so on and so forth. And then the third level being your narrative identity, the story you create from the experiences you have, that then influences your characteristic adaptations and your traits. And that constantly
Mm.
evolves over the lifespan. And it strikes me that those who are some years out of being released and perhaps experience some early trauma from that release start to settle down with that different narrative identity, as you said, described there. I've kind of accepted that football is always going to be a part of me, and it's going to be a part of my, and people are going to talk to me about this, and so it doesn't irk you as much. Essentially, if we think of traits, it doesn't tap into your neuroticism so much now.
Yeah.
It's kind of you've settled that slightly.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. I think it's that when you refer to like narrative, it's the reframing of
Yes.
things, and perhaps things turn from negative experiences with enough time. You can reframe them into a positive experience. Like I feel now, um, within my sort of journey, that I'm actually able to talk about this stuff and put it into a paper, and actually going through those experiences now become a positive because I feel like I'm helping other people. But 5 years ago, I would have still probably felt quite negative about all this stuff because it was painful, and not something I wanted to openly talk about. And I feel as people come out of sport or football and they just start looking at other things, I think they get a real sense of there's so much out there in the world that I've not explored yet. And a lot of the guys were doing a lot of exploration, perhaps what they should have been doing in their teenage years. They were now doing it as 20-year-olds going into their late 20s and early 30s. And you could get that sense across all the participants. They were all on a different they were in a different place with that, but they were all in that exploration phase of I like this, and perhaps the oldest guy who gave the really nice comment to finish things off, which was "It's part of me, it's not all of me." He was the guy who was longest out of the game, and really he'd explored, and he was in a different career, and he was doing lots of other things, and he'd moved on, and he had that really nice sort of sense of I don't know closure.
Yeah, this narrative that you've used a really important word there, reframe. To reframe, we're constantly
Yeah,
creating an inner story that helps us navigate through our world, and it sounds like some of the players here have created an inner story that's really helped them overcome some of the past, what you might describe as trauma from
yeah.
being released. But I know in your paper you do use this term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it sounds to me like there is an ongoing battle for some players to be able to deal with their experiences from being released. Can we close things here by, can you speak a little bit to this, please?
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing to sort of finish on, and it's the end of the themes and the results. But one of the guys said something really powerful around. He felt like leaving professional football, it was an existential crisis for him. He's never felt good enough ever since. He says sort of PTSD where I feel like even when I achieve things in my professional life, I'm always that guy that never made it in football, and this is sort of the long term impact of being released. No matter how hard some of the guys try to move on and create different lives, and this guy, by the way, was very successful in his new career and was doing really, really well. He still always had this narrative in his head that he was never good enough because he'd never made it, and this, yeah, I think he'd been about 15 years on from football by this point, or maybe 12 to 15, somewhere like that. He still carried around that internal sort of negative voice around himself because of his experiences in football. And I think it's that we call it like a legacy of surviving and not thriving. And that's the sadder end of the paper. It's sort of the sadder part of the paper that some of these guys have not been able to move on, sort of emotionally, cognitively, from what their experiences in football, and it's been pervasive in their life ever since.
And it highlights what important work this is, and this is so important for coaches listening in who are doing great work out there. But we've got to continue to have this conversation, because young people who take their sport seriously have to navigate that seriousness. They have to navigate their experiences as they take their sport seriously. So I know that you will have tapped the interest of many people listening in. So how, Johnny, can people find you, follow you, and get in contact?
Yeah, so I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is Johnny Gorman 92. I've done a bit of a thread on this paper with some stats and so on, which people might want to look at. And that gives a link to the paper as well. And then I'm on LinkedIn. I don't think I use much else than that at this moment in time. So they're my two avenues if you want to contact me. And I'm more than happy for any ideas around things like aftercare or any stories people want to share. I've had lots of really interesting conversations with people. So I'm always open to anything around this subject.
Brilliant. Johnny, thank you so much for today.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to know what you, the listener, think, so please do get in touch via X or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.